David, while we have you, I was going to ask you what you made of the budget update delivered by Jim Chalmers yesterday. What did you make of it? The government clearly under pressure now to implement some spending restraint with deficits forecast for the next decade or so.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, I had a sort of tongue-in-cheek line yesterday that they're spending like a drunken sailor, but it's spending in, areas that I think most people would say is, warranted in terms of aged care, disability care. So from a micro perspective, you can't really fault that spending. I mean, but from a macro perspective, I guess, they are still the government and they still need to be spending that money responsibly, finding cuts elsewhere in the budget or raising taxes. But at the moment, it's just like an increase in spending, which is adding to demand in the economy and without trying to find budget savings elsewhere. So I can see that, the spending is socially, warranted. But from a macro perspective, I think the disappointing element for economists around the country is that there's no evidence of any offsetting restraint in the budget. So it's just adding to pressure in the economy on inflation, on interest rates. It's forcing the Reserve Bank to squeeze down on the private sector.
David, it did seem like a pretty grim set of numbers heading into 2025. How would you characterise the state of the Australian economy?
Look, it's a two-speed economy. Of course, we've got the public sector, the care economy booming, as we saw yesterday with the budget numbers. But the consequence of that is that interest rates are at restrictive levels, and the consumer in particular is under a lot of pressure. No signs yet of consumer spending recovering. So we've got at the moment a fairly and building construction also constrained. We've got the ongoing squeeze on the private sector. Overall growth, I think, is going to remain fairly subdued until we get the inflation rate down and the RBA can start to deliver some relief on the interest rate front. But at this stage, it's looking like, more like mid-year, even later next year. And I think what the Fed did overnight is important, because if the Fed is scaling back the timing of its rate cuts and the Aussie dollar is weakening, which will add to upward pressure on import inflation, it just means the RBA, is less likely to go early in cutting rates as well.
One of the big things to watch out for, of course, next year is what the US President-elect Donald Trump does when it comes to his threatened tariffs. What's the expectation in the markets here about what sort of impact that will have on China and therefore us here at home?
Well, I mean, I think, China's obviously in the firing line. They're probably the country most at risk from the Trump tariff increases, and hence, we are potentially collateral damage in that stoush between the US and China. I mean, one of the risks, I think, is if China is forced to, take more imports from the US, it may take less from us in some areas, wine, for example. But at the moment, we still don't know exactly what Trump will do. We know he talks tough. The hope in the markets, at least, is that a lot of his talk and a lot of his threats is posturing, and he won't actually go through with the severity of the tariff increases he's proposed. I mean, it would put immediate upward pressure on US inflation, downward pressure on Wall Street, and countries would obviously retaliate. So I think the markets are sort of hoping that he's not going to be, the action won't match the words at this point.
David, really appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for joining us.
No worries. Great to be with you.